Success, money, and power can create the illusion that everything and everyone can be replaced or controlled. In real life, however, relationships survive only on loyalty and respect, not status or wealth. When trust is repeatedly ignored, consequences do not always come with drama or warning. They arrive quietly through firm decisions and lost chances. This story reflects a real-world truth. By the time betrayal feels serious enough to regret, the person you took for granted may already be gone.
The Seoul skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the midnight canvas as Park Jin-woo adjusted his Italian silk tie in the mirror of the executive washroom. At 38, he commanded an empire that had revolutionized South Korea's tech industry. His name synonymous with innovation and ruthless business acumen. Yet tonight, as he prepared to leave the gala that celebrated his latest acquisition, his wedding ring caught the light a simple platinum band that seemed oddly heavy on his finger. 8 years ago, Amara Okafor had walked into his life with blueprints that would transform not just his company headquarters, but his entire existence. The Nigerian architect possessed a rare combination of artistic vision and structural genius, her designs reflecting the warmth and vibrancy of her Lagos upbringing, while embracing Seoul's modern aesthetic. Their collaboration had sparked something beyond professional admiration. She challenged his cold calculations with passionate creativity, while he offered her the resources to build her dreams into reality. Their marriage had been a merger of equals, or so Jin-woo had once believed. Amara's architectural firm, backed by his connections and capital, had flourished internationally, designing landmarks from Dubai to New York. But somewhere between quarterly reports and global expansions, Jin-woo had begun to view their partnership through the lens of a balance sheet. He calculated that the penthouse in Gangnam, the black card with no limit, the chauffeur-driven Bentley, these investments surely outweighed his increasing absence. Tonight marked their 8th anniversary. Amara had texted him about the intimate dinner she'd planned at their favorite restaurant, the same one where he'd proposed. But the gala was too important, the networking opportunities too valuable. He'd sent his assistant to deliver a diamond necklace with his apologies, certain that its 6-figure price tag would smooth over any disappointment. Yoon Seojin appeared at the bar, like an algorithm's perfect output, ambitious, with a portfolio that complemented his empire's expansion plans. Their conversation flowed from market projections to whispered possibilities, champagne blurring the lines between professional and personal. When she suggested continuing their discussion in her suite, Jin-woo's wedding ring felt like nothing more than a minor variable in a larger equation. Dawn painted the Seoul sky in shades of guilt as Jin-woo's driver navigated the empty streets. He rehearsed his excuses, already planning the grand gesture that would eclipse this indiscretion. Perhaps the vacation home in Jeju that Amara had admired, or funding her dream project in Lagos. Money had always been his language of apology. The penthouse welcomed him with unusual silence. No soft jazz playing, no scent of Amara's morning coffee, just an envelope on the marble kitchen counter, his name written in her elegant script. Inside, divorce papers bearing official stamps and her signature. Beside them, her wedding ring caught the morning light, its simple beauty a stark contrast to the diamonds he'd buried her in. Over the years, no tears, no confrontation, no chance for his practiced explanations. The security footage told the story he'd been too blind to read. Amara had known for weeks her architect's access to his building's systems, revealing not just tonight's betrayal, but a pattern of late-night meetings that weren't about mergers and acquisitions. While he'd been calculating market advantages, she'd been orchestrating her own exit strategy with the same precision. She applied to her blueprints. Her firm's Seoul operations had been quietly transferred to Lagos, joint assets liquidated and divided according to prenuptial agreements he'd signed without reading, trusting her completely back when trust still meant something. The woman who'd designed his empire's foundation had architected its perfect demolition, leaving him standing in a monument to his own arrogance. The conference room in Tokyo's Ritz-Carlton hummed with the energy of pharmaceutical industry titans discussing billion-dollar deals. Lee Jae-soon stood at the center, his tailored suit and confident smile projecting the image of a visionary who had transformed his family's modest pharmaceutical company into a global powerhouse. At 42, he wore success like a second skin, accepting praise for breakthrough medications that had revolutionized treatment for autoimmune diseases. What the admirers didn't know was that the true genius behind every innovation was thousands of miles away in Seoul, bent over a microscope in a laboratory that had become her second home. Adeus Nuosu, his wife of 7 years, possessed a mind that could see molecular possibilities others missed. The Ghanaian biochemist had come to Korea on a research fellowship and stayed for love, or what she had believed was love. Their partnership had begun with genuine collaboration. Jae-soon provided the infrastructure and family connections. Adaes brought the brilliance that transformed theoretical chemistry into life-saving medications. But somewhere along the way, the narrative shifted. His introductions evolved from my wife, the brilliant scientist, to my team of researchers. Her groundbreaking discoveries became his vision and leadership. Adaes had accepted this erasure, believing in the strength of their union, trusting that behind closed doors, he knew and valued her true worth. In Tokyo, as Jae-soon delivered his keynote address about innovation and leadership, a young venture capitalist named Matsuda Yuki approached him afterward. She praised his genius, hung on his every word, and made him feel like the visionary he pretended to be. The sake flowed freely at the networking dinner, and when she suggested discussing investment opportunities in her suite, Jae-sung's wedding ring felt like a mere accessory to his successful persona. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Adaes sat in a law office, signing documents that would change everything. For months, she had been meticulously documenting every formula, every breakthrough, every late night when her discoveries became his presentations. The prenuptial agreement Jae-soon had insisted upon designed to protect his family's wealth contained, a clause he'd overlooked in his arrogance. Intellectual property, created during the marriage, would belong to the creator, not the company. He'd been so focused on protecting his inheritance that he never imagined she would create anything worth protecting. The patent applications bore her name alone: treatments for lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, billions of dollars in potential revenue, all legally hers. For lawyer, a sharp-minded woman who understood the price of being underestimated, had ensured every document was ironclad. Jae-soon returned from Tokyo to find their Gangnam mansion eerily quiet. Adaes's laboratory equipment was gone, her closet empty, her presence erased, except for a single USB drive on his desk. The drive contained 7 years of evidence, emails where he'd taken credit for her work, presentations built from her research, media interviews where he'd claimed her discoveries as his own vision. She had moved to a modest apartment close to the small laboratory she'd rented to begin her own company. No dramatic confrontation, no tears, just the quiet efficiency of a scientist who had finally decided to claim her own formula for success. The divorce proceedings unveiled the truth, like a chemical reaction exposed to light. The media, hungry for scandal, devoured the story of the billionaire genius who had built an empire on his wife's brilliance. Former employees came forward, corroborating Adaes's role. Stock prices plummeted as investors realized the company's innovative pipeline had walked out the door. Within months, Adaes's startup secured international funding, her name finally attached to her genius. Jae-soon watched from his crumbling empire as she gave interviews about innovation and integrity, never mentioning him by name but making clear that true success couldn't be stolen or borrowed. The man who had inherited everything learned, too late, that the only legacy worth having was the one built on truth and respect. The champagne tower in the Grand Hyatt's ballroom reached toward the ceiling, a monument to Kim Min-chun's latest triumph. At 45, he had just closed the deal that would make him the largest real estate developer in South Korea, adding a prime Gangnam district to his portfolio. the son of a construction worker, had built an empire of glass and steel that redefined Seoul's skyline. And tonight, he felt invincible. Across the city, in their Hanamdong mansion, Folek Adami tucked their children into bed. 10-year-old Junho asked again why daddy couldn't read him a story, while 7-year-old Soman had stopped asking altogether. Folek's gentle Nigerian accent soothed them with promises of tomorrow, though she knew tomorrow would be different from anything they expected. The financial analyst who had transformed Minchun's small construction company into a billion-dollar conglomerate was executing her final calculation. Their story had begun 15 years ago when Minj, desperate to save his failing construction business, hired the brilliant Nigerian analyst everyone said was too young, too foreign, too female to understand Korean real estate. But Folek saw patterns others missed, understood global markets in ways that transformed local opportunities into international investments. She structured deals that turned single buildings into entire districts, creating a web of holding companies that maximized profits while minimizing risks. Minjan had been grateful once, publicly crediting his wife's genius in early interviews. But as the empire grew, so did his ego. Her strategies became his vision. For late nights analyzing markets became his sacrifice. The children learned to recognize their father by his absence, while Folek became a ghost in her own success story, visible only in the perfectly balanced books that funded his ambitions. The acquisition celebration stretched past midnight. Success and Soju blurring Minshon's judgment. His secretary, Choi Soo-men, had always admired him, laughed at his jokes, made him feel like the titan he believed himself to be. When she suggested they review the contracts in her apartment, he followed, drunk on power and possibility, forgetting that every tower he'd built stood on foundations laid by the woman waiting at home. Except she wasn't waiting. Minjun returned at dawn to find the mansion dark, his footsteps echoing through empty rooms. On his desk lay a manila envelope, not divorce papers, but something far more devastating. Financial documents revealing the true structure of his empire. While he'd focused on cutting ribbons and giving interviews, Folek had built something more complex than any skyscraper through the holding companies she'd established. All legitimate and documented, she controlled 60% of his assets. The financial architect of his empire had designed its perfect division. A single note in her elegant handwriting: "The children are in Lagos. They'll finally have a parent who shows up." The Korean courts, examining the meticulous paperwork, found everything legal. Folek had protected not just her interests, but their children's future, ensuring their education and inheritance through trusts Minjan couldn't touch. His business partners, discovering that the financial genius behind their profits had departed, pulled out one by one. Banks called in loans that Folek had always managed to restructure. The empire built on her invisible foundation crumbled visibly without her. 6 months later, Minjun stood alone in an empty penthouse, one of the few properties still in his name. The video calls with his children grew shorter each week, their Korean fading as they embraced their mother's homeland. They spoke of new friends, of a mother who attended school plays, of a life where success meant presence, not presence. The man who once owned half of Seoul's skyline now owned the hardest truth. Every tower he'd built had cost him the only structure that mattered. In the reflection of his floor-to-ceiling windows, he saw not a real estate mogul, but a man who had traded his family for buildings, love for leverage, and a brilliant wife's devotion for a secretary's admiration. The empire of glass and steel stood as monuments to his greatest loss, the wealth that had walked away with his family's hearts.